Citizens of the Oasis. Like many of you, I only came here to escape. But I found something much bigger than just myself. Are you willing to fight?
This is war. Finally.
Welcome to the rebellion.
Ready Player One. Experience it in IMAX, March 30th.
Hello and welcome to episode 40 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan and my gamer tag is Mr. Peabody70 and joining me is...
We don't give real names in here.
Ah! It's a podcast. It'll be okay.
Okay. Well, as always, it's Daniel.
And your gamer tag?
Dead Man.
Dead Man. Very nice.
Actually it's Dead Man 3913, but, you know.
Okay, fair enough.
Dead Man for short.
Fair enough. Dan can be found online at...
on the PlayStation Network.
at various locations throughout the Oasis. So, this episode we are reviewing listener-selected movie, Ready Player One, sent in by listener Jeff, as referred to in our last episode. And we'd like to thank all of our listeners for submitting movies for our zeros and fives episodes. Just so happened to, conveniently enough, was the most recent addition to the listener request list.
Which might raise some suspicions if this was fixed or not, but yeah, you know, whatever. It's not like we're giving away money.
Well, true. From the standpoint of there is no true random number generation within Excel, it might be said that it's fixed, but I don't actually understand how that works, so it's as random as I can make it.
We can neither confirm nor deny the fixing of such fixations.
Exactly.
And we have really no way of fixing it.
Sorry. It's the only thing I had to tap on to give you a rim.
Well, so you could have done that.
I could have, but I didn't. So anyway, we haven't gotten any listener feedback on our The Cutting Edge episode, so we'll skip right to the how did this get on your shelf, Dan? Because I think your reason was probably the same as mine.
Well, maybe. I mean, this is a multi-tiered reason. I mean, one, because this was the assignment. I didn't own it before it was chosen. It was on the to-do list, on the Amazon wish list. I had every intention on buying it because word of mouth and what I understood this movie to be. So it was one of those things that eventually would have ended up because of the nature of this particular beast. And lastly, just because I'm a child of the 80s, and like I said, because of the nature of this particular beast, you know, it was something that I had to have. So this is why I didn't just stream it on Amazon. I went out, I bought it, and now I own it.
Those are pretty much similar reasons to mine. I didn't have to own it, but I wanted to because I take the recommendations of friends to heart. They generally tend to know what kind of movies I will like or not like. So when someone says, I think you'll really enjoy this movie, it's worth buying blind on occasion.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a few circle of friends I have that will give me movie advice that I will actually take to heart, and even fewer of them whose advice I will buy a movie sight unseen. Even if it's a movie I've never even heard of, and they say, "Oh, I found this obscure movie, and I think you'd like it." Yeah, there's a handful of people who can say that and say, "Yep, I'm going to spend my money on it then," because if they think I'm like it. And so far, knock wood, they haven't been wrong.
Yeah. There are some friends that will make recommendations for movies that I will Redbox first, because really I think that's about the only way you can truly rent a movie nowadays. Stream it or whatever, but still, you know, rent an actual physical disc and pop it into a player. This was not one of those movies. I had looked at it like I should probably Redbox that, but it was more a matter of I should probably buy this one day. Because, again, it's a movie that I wanted to experience and would probably watch again. And I know we're going to talk about it, but there are so many Easter eggs in this movie that it's almost impossible to catch them all on the first viewing.
Yeah, which makes me wonder. It's like, an Easter egg is technically defined as something rare and hidden. But this thing is littered. This thing is littered with Easter eggs. So, I mean, does it cease to be an Easter egg, and or do we just finally just call it scenery?
Yeah, I think that you're right. I wouldn't call these Easter eggs. I'm sure that there are some in there somewhere, but these are references. There's nothing hidden about them. They're in plain sight. They want you to see these references. It's part of the charm of the movie. Mm-hmm. So, all right, well, that answers how we got under shelves, and we're already sort of getting into talking about the movie. So I wanted to ask you this.
Okay.
Because I want to get it out of the way, because I don't want to spend the entire episode, and you and I had spoken about this before we started recording. I don't want to spend the entire episode talking about all of the references. So...
Mm-hmm. Which... it's funny. It's in our podcast we reference different movies and everything, and this reminds me of a scene in that movie A Few Good Men with Tom Cruise and Kevin Bacon, where Kevin Bacon, his lawyer character, was going to bring out all these Marines who said, "We never saw anybody who could say that they saw Colonel Jessup give the order for the code red." And Tom Cruise is like, "Hey, can we just suffice to say that he's going to bring a bunch of these guys and say the same thing?" And it's like, I'll concede that none of them saw that. Yeah, we can go ahead and concede that. And that's kind of was like, yeah, can we just concede that there were a lot of cool things to see in this movie? Yeah, we'll concede to that, and we'll just touch on the highlights. So.
Yeah, and that's fine. What were some of your favorite references?
The references that I enjoyed the most were the ones that I wasn't expecting. Like, one example was... and forgive me, I forget exactly what the scene was because I was just kind of looking at it, was when he put something in a box, and it was the box that Gizmo the Mogwai came in from Gremlins. And the thing is, again, probably 99.99999% of the world's population would not recognize that box because in all intents and purposes, it's just a box. But you look at that and I'm like, that's the box from Gremlins. Such an insignificant little object that held that much meaning to me. That was by far the one that sticks out the most. Because the rest of them, it's like, I enjoy that, the motorcycle from Akira was there. I don't want to say that it's like a full spectrum fan favorite. I mean, it's like if you're into anime, everybody who's into anime knows Akira. It was one of those breakout anime things that really hit America and that really brought anime to the mainstream. And so the motorcycle from that is very well known among anime fans.
I'm going to have to talk to my daughter. She's really big into anime, and I don't know that she's familiar with Akira.
Really? Because, I mean, like I said, when it came out, it was huge. I mean, everyone, it's like... And that's the thing. I mean, I've been watching what... I didn't know it was anime at the time. It was just Japanese-made cartoons. Speed Racer and all these other, like, giant robot series that I used to watch as a child. And it's like, again, now we call it anime. So when Akira came out, I was like, oh, this is cool. But everybody was talking about it. It was such a huge thing, And like I said, and that's when anime really exploded in this country. And it became such a pop culture thing that it still continues to this day. And that was one of the references that, again, it's like I expected that.
Yeah. What I enjoyed were a lot of the video games that I had actually played as a child being referenced in there, and particularly the Atari 2600.
Oh, yeah.
I spent countless hours playing on an Atari 2600 with my brothers, and there were so many times that it was just before all of the consoles came out, there was this one. It was the one console to rule them all. And we would spend time on that. And the interesting thing, that the statement that this movie makes is go outside and enjoy the real world. And we talk about that now in this day and age in 2018, that, everybody's on their phones or everybody's in their video games or on their television or whatever, and they don't go out and experience people or their environment or whatever. But in the 80s, we had the Atari 2600, and we spent countless hours doing that. We just happened to balance it with going outside as well. So, that was a really cool reference that I liked, because ultimately the movie came down to an Atari 2600 reference.
Yeah, but, the beautiful thing, again, another little reference that stood out that I enjoyed is that when he gets to the end and he's got all the keys and he's in Halliday's room and he sees young Halliday playing a video game console, he's not playing an Atari 2600.
It's ColecoVision. Intellivision.
It was an Intellivision.
Yes.
It was an Intellivision. Yeah, the obscure console that if you ask most people about, they don't remember. But I remember playing a lot of that because I had a friend who had that. Our favorite game that we played was Dungeons and Dragons. It was very much. It was a lot like what they were featuring, that adventure game, but it was just like a 8-bit maze that you walked around, and it was amazing because 2 players could play at once, and that was the beautiful thing. You had 2 characters on the screen, and that hard dragon wasn't so hard anymore because you had a teammate. I remember that was the first little bit of co-op that I ever played as a child, and it made it more fun because it's like if you play alone, that dragon came out and you're dead, and that was frustrating.
Yeah, the Atari 2600, I had one for a good long time, and it was kept in my grandparents' basement after I joined the Navy, and I never really got back to it. And the one time I did try to see if it still worked, it didn't. So the interesting thing now is you can go get an Atari 2600 flashback that has 40 or 50 games on it, and Adventure is one of those games. So I've spent time in the recent past, actually playing that game. So I did enjoy that as a reference, and the fact that it was the first video game with an Easter egg in it was kind of cool.
Yeah, nice little bit of trivia there, adding that Warren Robinette, the creator of Adventure, that his legacy was the Easter egg, and I appreciated that.
Yeah, because the game was not really terribly great. I mean, it was as good as it could have been back in the day.
And that's the thing that, I always say about the Atari 2600. I mean, it was definitely a fixture of the 80s. You could say it was a major step in our video game culture. But for me, when I played them back in the time, yeah, they were a lot of fun. I played with friends. I had this one friend. It was his Atari 2600 that we played. And he always used to kick my ass on everything. But the few times when it's like, hey, I'm actually winning, that son of a bitch hit the reset button all the time.
Oh, no. That's just evil.
Yeah, just like, and of course, the parents are just like, well, if you can't play nice, you don't play. Why are you yelling at me?
I didn't do anything. He did it.
I know, he did. So, but, and the thing is, like, my own personal history on that, it's like playing by myself. Actually, and that's the thing, I didn't actually own a 2600. I owned a ColecoVision, and my mom bought me the adapter that can play Atari 2600 games on the ColecoVision.
Oh, wow. See, I never had a ColecoVision. Yeah. I'd always had the 2600, and we just got more and more games until it was time to not have games.
Yeah, but I eventually got bored with it. Because video games in those days was all about endurance. How long can you go? How high of a score can you get? I mean, yeah, Adventure was different in that it actually had a beginning and an end. But video games, for the most part, were just keep going, see how long you can go.
Yeah, progressively harder and harder levels, or faster and faster.
Yeah, and that's why I got bored with it. And so for the longest time, I kind of strayed away from video game consoles. When the resurgence after the because there's that whole talk about when Atari 2600.
You cannot say 2600.
When 2600 kind of tanked the video game industry for a while, but with that game E.T.
Oh, God.
I don't know if you ever...
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. And the lore.
Mm-hmm. I strayed away. So when PlayStation 1 and Sega Genesis and Saturn and all these Nintendo NES, they all came out, and I just kind of strayed away from it thinking, I don't want to spend money on something that I'm going to get bored with and let it collect dust on my shelf. But it wasn't until somebody brought a PlayStation 2 with Grand Theft Auto 3, and that was it. My life was over. That's kind of the segue, is that the one thing that, I don't even want to call it a complaint, just kind of like is that there weren't too many contemporary video game references other than like maybe some references to Overwatch and Halo.
Yeah, and Halo is still a 20-year-old game, so even though it's current, it's still a game franchise that's going on. The game started in the 90s.
Yeah, and like I said, I just, kind of wish I saw a little bit more references. Maybe if I look harder, I can find them or something. But, there weren't any that were overtly obvious to me on first viewing. And that's really not much of a complaint. It's just like, oh, okay, well, you can't have everything, and I'm an adult. I'll move on. Movie's still good, sort of thing.
Right. And kind of wrapping up the references conversation, because, again, I don't want to make this all we talk about. There were a lot of good references, and yes, this movie relied heavily on references from the 80s, which kind of goes back to the theory that I had espoused on one of our previous episodes. I think I've done it more than once, but the every 30 years theory, if you recall that one. Every 30 years, what was old is now new again. And 30 years ago, these were the games. 30 years from now, people are still going to get the references, but it's going to be more Overwatch, like you're saying, more Red Dead Redemption, more whatever, Call of Duty, all that kind of stuff. That stuff is all going to be in the next Ready Player One, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So to say that there are a lot of 80s references, it tracks exactly with what people of our age want to go see. You go, oh, I remember that, I remember that, I remember that, and have that nostalgia flashback.
Oh, that brings me back. Oh, look at that. Oh, I used to play. Yeah, there's the. Oh, I had to fight that the whole watching of this.
And then there's just enough newer stuff for your kids who are probably, for you from 2 to 20-ish. For the most part. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't some older, but I mean the bulk of them are in there, and you would probably take your kids to this movie if they were older and say, hey, this is what I used to do. I know this, I know that, I know this, and you can bond over that. So from that standpoint, I think the 80s references were phenomenal. I think that given it's a Spielberg movie, and he was tremendous in the 80s, not saying he's not tremendous now, simply saying that in the 80s, Spielberg was the name. And I think this movie didn't necessarily capture that same spirit. Not that it's not a good movie, and I'm going to kind of expand on that. I think we are in an age now with movies where the Spielberg name doesn't mean as much as it used to. And I think that's true of many directors, unless it's obviously, some of the new generation. But I don't think that the names that meant something to us in our youth mean the same thing to the general populace today, if you catch what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think you're saying it quite succinctly. Yeah, because big names of one age doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be quite revered in the next one, even though they did great things. If you were to mention somebody great from the 60s, it's like I find myself having to explain to some younger generation people I work with, let's just say if I mention Get Smart. Oh, Don Adams, you remember him? Who?
Yeah.
Don Adams, man. He was, really funny. And it's funny because, somebody like that who was a comedy great of that time, and even a little bit into my time, but then you have somebody like Leslie Nielsen, who's also roughly from that time, even a little bit sooner, and they remember him. So
I think some people get pigeonholed, though. I think Don Adams was great at being Maxwell Smart, the voice of Inspector Gadget, but he didn't branch out in the way that Leslie Nielsen did and keep working the shtick. With the Naked Gun movies and Airplane and all of the other movies that he's done, he crossed comedic genres, still comedy.
Mm-hmm. But here's the funny thing, since we're talking about Leslie Nielsen, is that, he was like a lot of those actors in Airplane. They were like the action stars. They were the dreamy hunks that women
swooned over.
Yeah, that's the word. They swooned over. It's like, oh, he's so manly. Look at he can really beat up a guy and really, I'm trying to think of something to say without sounding like a total sexist douche here, but but he was the ladies' man. He was the leading man, like a lot of those guys from Airplane, and him crossing into comedy, which is kind of funny, and that's all we remember him as at this particular point in history. We don't really remember the ladies' man from way back.
What's also interesting is the leading men of the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. A lot of them were just normal-looking dudes, in the sense that nowadays, oh, look at him, he's so dreamy, or whatever. And yes, I'm speaking specifically to men, because for the most part, the sexuality of women has always been a thing in film, where you look at Raquel Welch, you look at Rita Hayworth. I mean, The Shawshank Redemption. There's the classic scene about the movie poster. It's always been a thing where women have been focused on as an attractive person in the movie, as opposed to men, which have been cast as this rough and rugged, manly man, like that old Robin Williams routine. Oh, you've just made your friend's face into goo. Oh, what are you gonna do? Oh, we're gonna go have a beer. Just like a guy you could hang out with. And I think the appeal of that was it gave the everyman the ability to identify with the lead character. And then the other aspect was what we're currently discussing today. This is my social justice warrior moment, where women have to identify with these super attractive women and try and make themselves more attractive so they can live up to the movie star image and just continually be body conscious or, appearance conscious, where men don't necessarily have that problem. That's all I got to say about that. It was just kind of a thing that I noticed. And that's one of the things about the Oasis that made it so appealing. And they even commented on it in the movie. In the Oasis, you can be whoever you want to be. You don't have to be heavy. You don't have to be thin. You don't have to be black. You don't have to be white. You don't have to be Asian. You can be...
Don't even have to be human.
Exactly. So that was one of the things that the line specifically when H was talking about, how do you know she's not a 300-pound person living in her mother's basement? Because it's true. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the hook.
That was the beautiful thing, is when he finally met H in person and she was like, what, not what you expected?
Yeah, and she was a very pretty girl, and she had a birthmark, so what, big deal. But I like the fact that...
No, yeah, that was Artemis. I'm talking about H.
Oh, H. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was awesome, because it did actually portray that, like, yeah, I'm not who I am in there. And in Japan, there is a game called Second Life. It's really big. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of it.
And there are people that live in there because you can be whoever you want to be. Again, that's the appeal of Oasis.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. It's like, Nina and I were watching it. We really enjoyed the intro when he talked about the Oasis, which is, there's something else about that too. It's like the whole opening sequence, it's like, I always kept thinking, the whole, we talk about show me versus tell me. Mm-hmm. And this was a great hybrid of it, because they're showing the real world, but he's describing the Oasis.
Right.
And that was a neat little juxtaposition. It's just showing us how he lives in the stacks, how people just kind of walk through each other's dwellings and nobody seems to care. And there's a difference of living in the real world and living in the Oasis. And that was just, again, that was a neat little show me with a little bit of tell me.
Yeah, I like the opening. It really did set the scene quite well.
Yeah, and like I said, it was like when he's saying, oh, you can do this, you can do that, you can be a different gender, and that, yeah, like you said, that was just totally describing, I remember when I was introduced to what Second Life was. And I've never played it, I've never been in the Second Life world, but I read a lot about it. It's like that was the description almost, saying that you could be whatever, whoever you want to be.
So, a couple of things. One, in the mid-90s, late 90s, I think, was when EverQuest came out, and people used to call it EverCrack because some folks would get lost in the game. Like, they totally did not have an identity outside of the game. And I had a friend that I I like to say laughingly that I almost lost to EverCrack. Happily, he realized that he was spending far too much time in the game, but you can see the extrapolation of video game development to get to the Oasis. That's why this movie made such sense to me, because I know that there are people that live inside of World of Warcraft or any of the other big games. Fortnite right now is huge. And there are people losing large chunks of their lives, which, again, is one of the statements of this movie. Go out and live in the real world. That's fine to do this, but remember, there's other stuff out there and people and all that kind of thing. I mean, I think the social statement that this movie makes is 100% true. Find a balance.
I don't disagree with that, but the thing that I kept thinking about, that it was very hard for me to shake, one was to connect this in some way to the Matrix. And you had the real world and you had the Matrix, and this particular movie, people wanted to be plugged into the Matrix because it was, one, they kind of had an understanding that it was not real, but at the same time, it kind of was real. You know, and it was like, oh, that the whole philosophy of choice is like, okay, they choose to be in there. Whereas the Matrix kind of implied that they didn't have a choice or anything. So it kind of makes me wonder now, you know, where the Matrix ended up, where it's just like, hey, people who want to stay plugged in, stay plugged in. The other people who wanted to leave, they could leave. And it kind of made me wonder, it's like, is there going to be like a business opportunity where it's like, hey, you know what? You can learn what Neo learned and realize that there are rules to the Matrix that you don't have to follow. And it became like this whole, you know, business, and you had this new group of martial artists who knew how to cheat the Matrix, and it's like, oh, I got superpowers in the Matrix now and stuff like that. And that's kind of like, just something I let loose in my brain, and that's what I end up with. So I don't even know where I'm going with this, but it's just a neat little concept that I thought of. But, you know, the thing is like, you know, when you talk about having to find a balance and spend more time in the real world, but, you know, it's like when you have a movie like this one, or a movie like The Matrix, that shows that the real world leaves a lot to be desired, and then the fake world, like The Matrix, like the Oasis, presents you with something that's a whole lot better. And it's not completely devoid of human interaction. I mean, here you see this kid who fell in love with a character. Now, that's not what she looked like, but it was still her. It was still her personality. It was still her thoughts and everything. That's what he fell in love with. And, you know, when he met her in person, she thought, oh, now that you see who I really am, that you're not going to like me anymore. And he said, no, it doesn't make a difference. And when he met his friends, you know, it didn't matter that the one character was an 11-year-old boy. It was a little shocking.
Yeah, but he was actually excited about that. Like, oh my God, you're only 11? That's so cool.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't really make a lick of difference. They were all still friends. They all still worked together. And, you know, that's what really matters. So the thing is like, you know, whether or not you want to say that that's where we're going to end up and if that's desirable or not, but, you know, if we end up all just plugging in and never leaving, you know, if they find some way to because he said, what was the only thing that took you out of it? It's like between eating, bathroom breaks, and sleeping, everything else is done inside the Oasis. You know, it's like you solve those problems and you plug people in and they never want to leave. And I don't know if that's 100% bad. I do know that there's drawbacks to that. I know there's some arguments against it. But, you know, like I said, I mean, as far as I can tell, especially from this movie, you know, it's like, it's not that there's a lack of human connection. It's like, I think they were just talking about a lack of physical connection. But that's just, you know, my 2 cents.
Well, I think one of the things about the Oasis that we've already touched on is you can be anyone. And it just so happens that our 2 main characters happen to be pretty much themselves inside the game. They're not trying to be someone they're not, like the head of the corporation. His avatar was this great big beefy dude that was more a personification of the way he viewed himself. Like, ooh, I'm a tough guy. Ooh, ba-doo. You know, the choice of avatar does say something about who you are, but by the same token, it also says something about who you want to be. So our 2 main characters never wanted to be anyone but who they were, just inside. Well, I take that back. They wanted to get outside of their current situation, but they still wanted to remain true to their personal identity, to their personalities.
Yeah, there's only so far that they wanted to take themselves from. They didn't want to be too outrageous.
Right, and I'm sure that there are dark corners of the Oasis that were all about being the happiest person you could be, or the darkest person that you could be. I mean, there had to be limits, right and left, up, down, whatever, to what you could be or do in the Oasis. There had to be serial killers in the Oasis. I mean, let's face it, if you gain coins by offing another character and you get their stuff or whatever, then there had to be people that would just specifically go out and stalk the highest scoring characters.
Yeah, well, you have that now. You have that in Grand Theft Auto Online.
Yeah, but again, it's an aspect of the human condition that you're going to get people that will do that. So the Oasis gives that freedom of consequence. You can't go to jail for killing somebody in the Oasis because they don't die in real life. But the other part of it is you don't feel the emotional ramifications personally either. Now, granted, serial killers is a bad example to get the emotional ramifications, but like H was just mowing people down on Doom World, which, again, foreshadowing, we know we're going to come back to that planet. Got it. No emotional investment in the other people because they're just avatars. It's that separation. So if you talk about warfare in this day and age, you've got drones and all that sort of thing. And I know this is kind of a weird leap, but if you take out the personal part of warfare, it's just machines doing stuff. And you're taking out a target.
Oh, yeah.
One of the conversations that I had with a very good friend of mine, in fact, it was Jeff who picked this movie, was when you're practicing to track down a submarine and potentially kill it and realize that if it came down to brass tacks and you actually had to go do the thing, you have to distance yourself by just thinking, I just killed a submarine. Never mind the people that were on it, I just killed a submarine. You have to think of it in the abstract as opposed to the fact that human lives were just lost.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Even when you recognize that in a setting, that can get you in trouble. And I don't know if you recall, that's kind of what got me in trouble in my latter days of the Navy, because I recognized that when you launch a missile over the horizon and you have that distance and everything, and like you said, you deal with it in the abstract. Yeah, we blew up a ship, and it's like that, that whole video game thing where you see the, in the distance, like, yeah, I took out a target, I took out this and everything. And I had a revelation that, yeah, when that missile blows up, there are body parts. There are people who are burned and dismembered and everything. And I remember seeking out pictures of that to just, reconcile in myself that that's what I was doing. And that was the potential that I could inflict on people and everything. And I remember the officers that were in charge of me did not like that I had pictures like that on my desk. They'd say, man, you're pretty sick, you're pretty this. And I just thought it was, later on, it was just like, yeah, that was pretty freaking hypocritical because we're the ones doing it, But ultimately, that got me in a lot of trouble for recognizing that reality. And yeah, it can give you head problems. I grant you that.
Well, I think that's why so many members of the armed forces have PTSD. I mean, there's plenty of examples of soldiers and sailors and airmen coming back from a combat zone with issues because they killed somebody. And you can say, man up all day long and, just, put it behind you. But, the human brain is a funny thing. And getting back to this movie, because we're kind of going down a dark road here. But getting back to this movie, one of the things that they make it a point of is showing how invested the people are in their avatars. So when TJ Miller's character, IROC, starts to get chopped up or die, he's like, dude, I spent a lot of time building up all this stuff. That's a major investment in my life. They have an emotional investment in their avatars. And through the main characters, you see that even though they don't know each other in the real world, they have emotional investments in their avatar friends. So when they lose one, if, let's say, H died, which it was very close when H was in the Iron Giant, which, by the way, a reference that I loved because I love that movie. Mm-hmm. There was a certain degree of loss felt. You're like, oh my God, this is real jeopardy, real danger. And it's just an avatar, but you could lose that representation of your friend. So it's interesting from an emotional standpoint how you get locked into things. And then going back to like the PTSD thing, this is an environment. This is a virtual world. Whether you pay attention to its realism or not, you're still making emotional bonds and you're still feeling the effects of losing your friends or people that you might know, or the fact that, again, that somebody else, who spent as much time on this as you did could be lost. Again, and maybe I'm going a little too deep into this, but the fact that the entire planet was spending so much time in the virtual world, these were people trying to escape the harsh realities of where they lived so that they could be somebody inside the Matrix.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you could look at it as just a way of maintaining at least a level of mental health. Because I think one of the lines that Nina and I really liked was this: like, this became a time when people stopped solving problems and just tried to live through them.
Yeah, I agree.
And yeah, that's that could really hurt a society. And I think the Oasis being very aptly named is like, when you're in a desert and it's basically every step kills you because you get the sun baking down on you, you're starving or whatever, and you go to some place that actually nourishes you. The human brain needs that.
Yeah, you need to feel like you're a part of a community. We are social creatures, after all.
And that there's some sort of meaning, that there's purpose. And yeah, like I said, the Oasis is some place that you can get that. Again, it goes back to that thing where it's like, if people spend a lot of time in there, and like I said, I don't argue against your statement of you got to find a balance, but being plugged into it, I don't know that that's 100% bad. I lose myself in games a lot. It's not as much as I used to, but I mean, sometimes you just need that little bit of escapism to be something else, and go places.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. Again, but like you said, I said, you said, I said. You got to find that balance, and the balance for you is different than the balance for me. So who's to say that your 3 hours of gameplay is not the same as my 20 minutes of gameplay or whatever? It's individual to the person. But the example in this movie is that people are spending far too much time in the Oasis because life is terrible and they live in stacked on trailers that are just slums in a junkyard, and no one really seems to care in the real world.
Yeah, partially right. It's not so much that nobody cares, it's just that I think a lot of people gave up. And like you said, just trying to live through it. It's just that thing where you get to that stage in a struggle where it's like, okay, look, I'm not gaining any ground. I'm never going to get out of this pit, or, it's never going to get any better than where we're at now. So I'm just going to accept what we have. They just accepted their lot in life. And it wasn't a lot, but that was their life,
Yeah, well played.
That was from another movie, and I can't remember which movie it was from.
Stealing lines from movies, pop culture references. Again, the story of this movie.
That's our lot in life. It's not a lot, but that's our life. What movie? Oh, God, listeners, help me out here.
Yes. Yes, the call to the listener has gone out.
I mean, I know I could Google it, but,
Yeah, it's more fun to ask the listeners.
Yeah, it's more fun. So you Google it. I'm too lazy.
But one of the things that this movie says about society in general, and again, I could be overlaying this over our current situation in the world, but the level of apathy in the 2040s, like 30 years from now, ironically, who knew, is magnified, and it's a matter of, like you said, accepting their lot in life. But I'm going to go political for just a second and go back to the 2016 election. 130 million votes were cast. There were 70, 80 million people that chose not to vote. The non-voting bloc was larger, would have won. If it was just like, hey, you know what, the non-voting bloc votes for blah, 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 then whoever that was would have won the presidency. But they didn't. That's not the way it works. I'm just saying that there was a lot more people that were apathetic about that. And I think that is exacerbated by the helplessness that some people feel to influence events that may or may not govern their lives. But it's like, I don't know, I can't do anything about the stuff that goes on inside the Beltway, so I'm not even going to vote.
And, it's like you just touched on something, though, that's like that feeling of helplessness. And it's not that there's a feeling of helplessness that is frustrating. It's that the lead up to that election, I heard so many people say, what's the point? It's not going to change that. And it's that perpetuation of that feeling of helplessness. That was the most frustrating.
Yeah, I agree. But that's what this movie is saying, is that if we let that feeling continue, then we're all going to be living in the Oasis because we don't want to pay attention to the real world and what's going on.
Yeah. So yeah, there's our political rabbit hole for the time being.
Yeah, and I didn't want to spend too much time on there, but again, it's one of those things where you kind of look at it and go, wow, you can see where society is heading down that road, and it's not a place that we like to think about, but there it is.
There it is. So, switching gears, if I may, then, since we're coming back out of that rabbit hole. The thing that we keep saying, and it just kind of reminded me, this wasn't my notes, this is something I just kind of had a revelation about. We keep talking about, it's like, we can be whatever we want to be, who would you be? The one 80s reference that is kind of missing that would have been great in this movie is the Oingo Boingo song, Who Do You Want to Be Today?
Oh, that would have been super cool.
Because that's kind of what that whole song is about, It's like, I think I'll be a tough guy, I think I'll be a punk, It's like... That'd have been a perfect in, I guess. I don't know. Maybe they couldn't get the rights to it or something, but that'd have been awesome. Another reference, though, that I'm kind of surprised wasn't in there because it was the first thing I thought of when I saw her. And it was the actress Hannah John Kamen. She was the Fanal Zandor, the agent. I forgot what agency that she was with, but she was the one that was doing the real world pursuit, and she had this hairstyle where it was like long hair with Betty Page bangs. Mm-hmm. And the whole time I'm looking at her and I'm like, oh my god, that's Thulsa Doom from Conan the Barbarian. Because her face and just the serious look that she kept giving, and even I'm looking at her on IMDb in that sense because she's got that really stoic, stern face that she's putting on. And yeah, that's total James Earl Jones from 1982's Conan the Barbarian. I'm just like, oh, what? Somebody used that reference. Somebody call her Thulsa Doom, will you please? But alas, we did not have a Tony Stark that threw those references out,
True. Or a Peter Parker to throw out weird, hey, remember that really old movie?
Yeah. Is Footloose still the greatest movie ever? It never was.
It never was. Yeah.
It never was.
But so one of the things that I also wanted to talk about, and kind of staying on the Oasis and its impact on society, is you could bend the rules of physics. So even though it followed the rules of Earth, the real world, for the most part, like the dance that they went, or the dance club that they went to, mm-hmm. You could float on air. Anything that you could do in a video game, or anything that you could think of, and limited only by your imagination, you could do here. So again, that appeal is so broad because you can do whatever you want. But one of the things that they only briefly touched on was that little house or building that Wade went by, more Parzival than anything, but it was like porn or something. I don't remember what the exact words were.
Yeah, you can go in that place.
Yeah.
He called it, yeah.
And not for nothing, I'm pretty sure that was a very popular spot in the Oasis.
Oh, no doubt. Especially so, when you had the opening sequence and you saw people, what they look like in the real world, you could tell that they're in the Oasis. They're like these kids in their living room. They're throwing punches and everything. Mm-hmm. There was that one woman.
Yeah, mom.
And... Well, I don't know if she was a mom. It's just a woman in her living room, and she was dancing on a pole. She was doing it very sexually, but she was not a particular person that society would generally accept as somebody that people would go see. But you could tell that she was probably somebody, who, in her eyes, was a lot more attractive to the rest of society, and she was being very sensual, and, people were probably looking at her avatar and desiring her, and, in her mind, she's feeling that desire. She's living that fantasy of being desired. Again, just kind of like we were saying, probably a very popular place, and it wouldn't surprise me if that's where she was.
Yeah, absolutely. But that goes to why the Oasis is so dangerous as a concept, because while again it's a choice, it is also a place that just by its very nature reinforces what you're trying to get away from. So let's take this heavier set lady who is not conventionally attractive in a world where she is lusted after by others because that's the avatar that she chose. She's not gonna fix her real world self because she can go live it in the avatar world in Oasis, and she's beholden to that universe for her self-worth. So at the end of the movie, and again, it's not like we don't cut to the end and give the spoilers and stuff. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, she's going to have to learn to deal with who she is as an individual. And I'll bet you large sums of cash that the mental health industry suddenly boomed immediately after they decided to shut off the Oasis on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
That's an interesting thing to think about.
It's just it's the danger of identifying too heavily with something that's not an actual physical representation of yourself, or that's not the physical you. You know, you got to get right with yourself before you can get right with other people, if you want to follow that psychological cliche. But we all have to deal with our insecurities. The Oasis gave an entire population a place to not have to worry about those.
Yeah, but it's like, that's the thing. I mean, and I've seen therapists do this, and it's no big secret with me, that they say, if there's that argument I'm sure you've heard it. It's like, well, if you could do this here, why can't you do it there? If you can talk to this person so easily, why can't you talk to that person easily? And it doesn't seem like that much of a stretch where somebody says, if you could be confident and outgoing and friendly and witty and everything in there, why can't you do that here? And and that's a common argument. Like I said, I mean, I've heard, like I said, therapists say that to me so many times and everything. And unfortunately, yeah, it's like you say, you got to get right with yourself in the real world and everything. And unfortunately, it's not so much that it's her problem. She is who she is, and that's we should accept people for what they are and what they can bring to the table. I mean, like the strength of their character and their talents and whatnot. But unfortunately, society will judge you based on how you look. And that's something that I think that as a society needs to deal with, because again, yeah, she can let her inner self. I mean, she can, if she is desired, in there, I mean, just solely for the look of her avatar, then yeah, that's a problem. But I mean, if she could be confident and witty and talented and everything in there, I mean, that's not coming from nothing. I mean, that's got to come from something. So
I've got two things. One, her avatar in the Oasis was probably not attractive to someone.
True.
So, again, you've still got that same issue of if the wrong person came up and said, you are really, really ugly to her avatar, and we're actually, strangely, assuming that it was a her. She was in the real world, she's a her, but what if she was a man? What if she was an alien? I mean, whatever her chosen identity was, because we assume that she had self-esteem issues, it's probably something that was pleasing in the Oasis, and that gave her pleasure, which is fine. That gives her somewhere where she can feel as though she's worth something, but by the same token, the minute that goes away, then she has to deal with her feelings of not being worth something. And while I agree to a point that society has to come to terms with its fixation on body image and appearance, the simple fact of the matter is it's a balance. Yes, society has to fix that, but we also have to accept that it's never going to be 100%, and someone is always going to say something hurtful to someone based on their appearance. And the simple fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, and this is just me waxing philosophic and not trying to get into an argument, the only person that has control over our own feelings is us. And we can choose how we react to criticism or how we react to insults about our body type. If you're comfortable with who you are, then it doesn't matter what anyone else says. You are who you are, and you're happy with that.
Well, again, I half disagree and I half agree, and I'm gonna say the first thing to rebut that is, one, yeah, you're talking about the balance. You have to reconcile, but it's like when you're talking about something as deep as the Oasis, or as deep as the Matrix, or whatever we're talking about. When we're talking about two separate realities that people live in, it's not just that you have to reconcile yourself in the real world. You have to reconcile yourself in the virtual world. It is a two-way balance. It seems like we're only talking about a one-way street here, that the virtual world is irrelevant. No, it's entirely relevant. There is a balance that you have. Because you're if you're one way in the virtual world, you kind of have to bring some of that to the table in the real world, and not just the other way around. But that being said, the other thing is that, you say the only person who can really control how you feel is yourself. And to a large degree, yes. But that is entirely based on your other needs, your other mental health issues. Are all your needs being met? Now, I'll give you an example. I won't go like the full spectrum of, talking about racism. But I'll bring it down a little bit lower so people aren't immediately turned off or anything. I mean, my own dealings with who I am. In junior high school, I was a fanboy. I love Star Wars. I love sci-fi, everything. And people called me nerd. People called me geek, freak, whatever. All those things, everything. And it was horrible. And even as much as I tried to tell myself that it doesn't matter what they say, it did matter, because then I had almost no friends. I was picked on constantly in school. I did not find any kind of peace or balance. My needs were not being met. So as much as I tried to control my own emotions, say I'm going to be happy regardless of that, it was very difficult to the point of almost being impossible to be happy in that time. Fast forward to adulthood, where I have friends, I have a family, I have people not necessarily who are friends, but who understand and I don't say agree, but relate to the things that I like. I have this whole Uber Nerds thing on Facebook, where we all come together and talk about being nerds. So now when somebody comes up to me and says, you're just a big geek, doesn't matter. I don't care. That's where I actually absolutely do have control of whether or not I feel bad or not about it, and I don't, because my needs are being met.
So the big thing that I want to capture from your statement was what you opened with. In response to my statement was I agree and I disagree. And I think you're saying exactly what I'm saying. We might be on slightly modified percentages of how much is you and how much of it is society. But you're making the same point that I am, at least I think, is that yes, it is you determining how you deal with things. And yes, it is society determining how they deal with you. But at the end of the day, and this is the part, again, that the point that I was making, you're in a place now where if someone calls you a geek, it's almost a source of pride. Like, yeah, you're damn right I am. And I got the Uber Nerds page to show for it.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I got something to back that up with. I have a life. I have friends. I have things. Again, my needs are being met.
Right.
And I'm in that place of control. But, it's like you stated that, the only person who can make you feel that way is yourself. And again, I agree with that under certain conditions.
So, but this goes to my point about the Oasis and bringing it back around is, and again, we're going to the heavyset lady as an example, but I'm sure that there were others throughout the world.
Absolutely.
Even the head of the corporation, he chose an avatar that showed who he was, not who he really was, but because he wanted to be seen as this big impressive man. The thing about the Oasis that you can do there that you cannot do in the real world, and this is kind of going to what I was saying, is if that lady had actually chosen the form of a more contemporarily attractive woman and was dancing seductively so that she could receive that serotonin squirt from having eyes on her, and being made to feel as though she were attractive, then that's great. That's fine. She's helping her self-worth. But let's say when she first picked her avatar, it was not conventionally attractive. She could change it immediately. And you cannot do that in the real world. And again, that's the danger of something like the Oasis. It's an immediate, instant gratification. Like, oh, you don't like the way I look? Boom, I'm somebody else.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing. In the real world, it's also dependent on whether or not certain conditions exist. Now, if you're somebody who has a lot of money and resources, you can totally change your image like that, as you said. I mean, yeah, granted, it's not a keystroke that's going to change their image, but, these people go to plastic surgery, they buy the expensive clothes. Sometimes they buy stuff that they can't afford to change their image, but they do it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's not entirely a virtual world type of issue. And again, it's totally a matter of what resources you have at your disposal.
Well, and that goes to my other piece, or the other thing that I hadn't said yet. One, your allusion to the real world and people who go and get plastic surgery, they still have to wait. It's still not instantaneous. They have to wait months for the scars to heal, for the swelling to go down, for everything to check out the way they want it to look and make sure that it's right. And there are other people that will continue to do plastic surgery because they're never happy. They're never happy with who they are, and they're always seeking to change their identity.
Michael Jackson.
I was going to say Joan Rivers, but all right, fine, whatever.
Okay. Michael Jackson. That's an 80s reference there.
Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, the thing that the Oasis grants that even with plastic surgery changing your appearance is the instantaneousness. You can do it immediately. Now, the other piece, and this goes to the thing that you led to with resources, in the Oasis, you all theoretically started out in the same spot. Everyone basically started out with the face covering, with the VR set and some chintzy gloves. But when Percival finds the key and he gets that initial outlay of money and he gets the Rubik's Cube, which again, awesome. And then he...
The holy hand grenade.
laughed hysterically.
Oh, absolutely.
Which, by the way, just real quick on that, I was a little sad when he didn't count to 3. And I don't think I recall hearing a reference to counting to 3. Kind of missed that one. It made me sad, but...
I know. I missed that too. Sorry.
But anyway, he was able to physically upgrade his VR set. So he had the IO1 whatever X38J whatever bodysuit with the full sensors and all that kind of stuff. And that's the part where the real world interacts with the Oasis, because that is about who's got the most resources. He couldn't have got that in his normal day-to-day life. The only reason he was able to purchase that was because he made $1 bajillion in the game, in the Oasis. So when you start to get into everybody being equal, they all started out in the same spot, but not everyone landed in the same spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To me, that was one of the beautiful things too, is the unwavering equality that you saw in the Oasis. I almost said the Matrix, but in the Oasis, that the ideal utopian sense that people advance based on their abilities and not their status.
Yeah, but going back to your comparison between the Matrix and the Oasis, the tremendous difference there is the Matrix was based on your self-perception, as opposed to the Oasis, which is based on your imagination of who you can be. That's where the difference really diverges, because the Matrix followed all the rules of the real world. The Oasis was whatever you could make it.
I like that.
So one of the things that I was curious about the Oasis was, how do they add on worlds? How do you get the DLC? I mean, I know you go to the place and you're in the Oasis, but did the company that he won continue to make new content? Or were there hackers out there creating homebrew and making their own mods and adding their own things? How did all the new stuff get in there? I assume the company just kept continuing to put stuff in there.
I would say, in the short answer, and my limited knowledge, just being a gamer myself, I'm sure there's a lot of nerds and geeks out there who have a better answer than I'm about to give. But one thing is, like, there's a thing called procedural generation, where game worlds are procedurally generated. And it was a shame that this game didn't, actually I shouldn't say didn't, that it wasn't what everyone hoped it would be. And that's the game called No Man's Sky, where you had an entire galaxy to explore. And unfortunately, it was a flop. It didn't deliver on its promises. But the potential, to have an entire universe to explore, I'm still amazed by it.
I love the concept.
Yeah, the concept, I played it, and it has the potential. I mean, to me, it was just a concrete slab. Everyone expected this huge, amazing structure, but you basically, I think that it wasn't entirely useless. You got a concrete slab, you got a foundation, now build on it. But yeah, procedural generation is just where it doesn't necessarily exist until you go there. And it's just a bunch of math equations that keep changing as you move. That's one possibility. The homebrews, yeah, you could probably have that as well. In something like the Oasis, that can be a little dangerous.
I'm sure.
Because I mean, I used to play Half-Life, and man, for my money, I got a lot of game involved because people were able to create their own levels and create their own games. And man, for buying just one game, I spent years playing homebrew levels and whatnot, and it was amazing. And so I'd like to think that would be happening in the Oasis as well.
Yeah, and I think that's true because if you design a crappy world, no one's going to play with it, and it'll probably just die on the vine. And I don't know if you're familiar with Disney's Infinity game series. They had Infinity 1, Infinity 2, and Infinity 3.
Yeah, I'm aware.
And you had the platform and the little pieces that would RFID to pop you onto the screen. Same concept, just again, not in a virtual reality sense, but you could create your own levels and worlds and put them up to a great big server in the sky. So I guess that kind of answers my own question is I'm sure there was some of that, but I would assume that the game hosts or the game creators had a certain degree of freedom to limit stuff, or it was a completely open economy like, hey, you know what? If nobody likes it, then it just exists there. And if you're creating a replica of your house and 3 people come over, then hey, 3 people came over and it's still a thing that exists and it's just hosted at your house server or whatever. Again, we're putting today's level of technology to a degree onto a movie that's set 30 years from now. And I'm pretty sure that memory processing, all that stuff would follow the law of doubling, which I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the law. Listeners, if you remember that technology law where every 18 to 24 months technology doubles, please let us know, or let me know. Maybe Dan knows it.
No, I'm not familiar, but I've heard the exponential growth of technology.
Right. So I'm sure that there's the processing power in the 2040s, which is good because this movie is set in the future. If it was set like 5 years down the road as a thing that was sort of maybe fully fledged, I think it was at mid 2020s was when he invented the game, 2028, 2029, maybe late 2020s. He invents the Oasis and puts it out there in the universe. Maybe the technology will be there then, and it would have had to have done nothing but improve. So
talking about the large game worlds, I do like that one of the first scenes that you see of the Oasis looks a lot like Minecraft.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm a fan of Minecraft. I mean, I appreciate its place in video game history, and I appreciate the marvel that it is. I've never really played it myself.
My daughter played it a lot.
Yeah, and I understand what it is and how great it is. And the reason why I really like it is that I don't know if you saw it. I posted a video on Uber Nerds, and it was about comparing video game maps and the evolution of the game field.
I did see that video. That was awesome.
And was it Minecraft was like this ridiculous size? I think it didn't have more surface area than the Earth. It's like,
yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, you have somebody who builds something like that, and it's just like, okay, the rest of you, fill it. And they're like, will they ever fill it? Who knows? Maybe in 100 years they'll fill it. But for the time being, you've got a lot of sandbox to play in, and so far, they barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, and it's so variable. If you say that there's a quadrillion ways to configure this, one of those quadrillion ways is to make every block the same and one block different. So when you get into the potential ways it could be different, it could be one single pixel is different on that one than every other one. So they're never going to fill it with all the possibilities. And that's the excitement of it. It's not necessarily about filling it. It's about seeing what you can put into it. I've walked through downloaded virtual replicas of the Millennium Falcon built in Minecraft. It was super cool. I really enjoyed it.
I believe so. So having played, PlayStation VR, I know that its potential right now is just touching on a pinprick against the world, and it's just, oh man, I'm excited to see where it's going to go.
So am I.
I mean, it's still going.
I went to Best Buy the other day and I tried the Oculus Rift, which is the PC version or a PC version of VR.
Yeah.
And I really wasn't sure what I was going to get into. I figured that it would be pixelated, you know, how you put some of the older phones close to your face and you can see all the hatch marks and all that kind of stuff from the screen. It was gorgeous. And I played this game where I was hurling fireballs at a wizard across a cityscape, and I walked to the edge of the building that I was on and looked down, and I know you had said this when you played, was it Arkham Asylum or one of the...
Arkham VR, which is a Batman game.
Yeah, that you felt a little queasy, and I understand exactly what you're talking about because I did that, and I was like, ooh, yee. And I knew I couldn't fall. I was standing on a solid surface, solid floor, but it still put me in the space where I was like, ah!
Yeah, I know in my brain, I'm in my living room. I am not going to fall 20 stories off this building, but yet it felt like it. I felt that uneasiness, that churning in your stomach when you stand on a ledge like that. Yeah. But I'll tell you, my testament always to the beauty and the power of VR is that I actually have a real-world comparison. You know, I stood next to a life-size replica of an X-Wing fighter in Hollywood.
Yeah.
You know, they brought it to Hollywood in the premiere of Rogue One, and I stood next to it. I got to touch it. I looked at it. I felt it and everything. So when I got to do that in VR, I was like, yeah, this is it. This is exactly it. I don't know. You know, the only thing that's missing is the Hollywood skyline. You know, because it's in a white field.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is it.
But
you know?
and the other aspect was with the little handset things, there were graphic representations of my hands, and I could interact with the environment, and I had to throw fireballs and hold a button, and that was kind of a little, well, let's just say it probably would have taken a little more getting used to than the 5 minutes of demo that I had while I was at Best Buy. But
Yeah.
you actually had to throw the fireball. So you're out there actually physically doing things. And that's one of the things that I think is going to revolutionize the gaming industry, or if not VR period, is when they develop a full body suit, kind of like what they have in this movie, where you get the haptic feedback, where it feels like you're actually touching a thing, you know, without the dangers of actually getting shot, like you know, they did in the movie. That is going to be a tremendous technological leap, because at least that way you're actually being active, and it's not just staring off into space, you know, drooling at the Oasis. You're moving, you're doing things.
Having that omnidirectional treadmill, you know, where you actually physically run from point A to point B.
Yeah, I actually posted the image of the DVD cover on the Facebook page and Twitter, because listeners, we're on Twitter too. Sorry, that comes later. But I shared it to my personal wall, and I didn't really include it in the listener feedback. It was kind of one of those things that I figured we would talk about. But a friend of mine commented on my personal wall that said, yeah, I didn't really understand how that omnidirectional treadmill worked. And I got to say, neither did I. I just kind of assumed it was magical. I Googled it. There are VR running treadmill kind of things where you slip on some special shoes and you're in the bowl, and that's how you kind of work the running thing. So that I could get, and I could see that being the next logical step. But I don't know how you can physically make an omnidirectional treadmill with an actual canvasy type of thing. And I was thinking about it, like, well, maybe if there were, you know, like a big ball under it or something, like a track ball, that would work. But even so, how do you get the physical canvasy bits to move in any direction? So I got to agree with my friend. I'm not quite sure how that worked. I think that would have been more of the bowl thing, that extension of that technology. I think that was the only thing that really kind of like, that's cool, I just don't know how it would work. Everything else was like, yeah, I could see where we could go to the next level with what currently exists.
Well, I just I leave that to better minds who want my money, because if you find something that works, if you give me something that works, you can have it.
It's like the Futurama Fry meme. Shut up and take my money!
Yeah, shut up and take my money. Just real quick, I want to jump back because, we were talking about avatars and them being extensions of ourselves and everything, and that the CEO of the movie, you read the actor is the same actor who was Director Krennic.
Yeah, Ben Mendelsohn.
Yeah, Sorrento.
Yes.
Was the character's name. He pretty much plays the same character as Director Krennic in this movie. As somebody who wants to be in charge, kind of is in charge, but not quite fully in charge, and is somewhat of a little man who aspires to be bigger.
Yeah.
And I just hope this man isn't pigeonholed into get typecast into that, because I like him as an actor. I like his look. I mean, just the character that he can play, a believable evil role. But yeah, he always just seems like this guy. It's like, you're just a little man, and he gets punked down and everything. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that. It's like it was kind of hard to look at this. Yeah, it was hard not to see the same character. To hear, be careful not to choke on your aspirations.
Yeah. Veda, release him. Oh, sorry. That is an interesting comparison. But it is interesting. I think the turn that he took in this movie was a little more amped up Weasley guy, as opposed to Rogue One, where he actually had a little bit of knowledge, just enough to be dangerous. This guy was just... I want to rule the world, which reminds me of the Tears for Fears song. Everybody wants to rule the world, which is, again, part of the 80s.
Yeah, and suspiciously absent from this movie, even though it would have been totally appropriate.
True. Yeah, but again, we already sort of talked about the references. How can you cram an entire decade into a 2 hour and 20-minute movie?
It's Spielberg. He can do anything.
I didn't see E.T. in there, not once.
Neither did I. I'm sure if we looked hard enough, we might be able to find him in the background, but...
I Googled, all the references, and when we had discussed it earlier, it was kind of it's a thing I might go to, but I might just attach the link in the show notes. So listeners, take a look at the little notes that come along with the episode. There might be a link to all of the references that are made in this movie. But again, I think that if that's all you're watching this movie for, you're kind of missing the greater theme.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that was probably the best marketing thing, is to say that there are hundreds of references in it, because people like us can watch and it's like, okay, suffice to say, there's going to be a lot of references. Let's watch the movie. I think it would have been terrible if I spent the whole time just looking for references and totally missed the movie.
Well, I did that, and I know that's why, again, I need to watch this movie over again without that in mind. And I've found that that's a thing that kind of has started to detract from my overall enjoyment initially of some of the more recent spate of Marvel movies. Is there's so many comic book Easter eggs that I get distracted looking for those, and I'm not paying attention to the movie. So I think a return to, it's a movie, have fun there, and then watch it for the Easter eggs afterwards, because that's the way I think we used to watch movies. And I don't say you and I, but I mean collectively, like Mark, is just for the fun of it. And I think that might be a part of the reason that this movie didn't do well at the box office, is because everyone's like, oh, it's just a bunch of references to the 80s. Like, no, there was an actual story here, too.
Yeah, and a good one at that.
It wasn't just, let's keep tipping our hats to sci-fi and game references, which, yeah, they were in there, but there was, a genuine theme to the movie. There was a purpose to what they were doing, and there was an end game. Again, we go back to him, we'll call it winning the game, and they shut the Oasis off on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The idea was, again, that, hey, let's go out and live in the real world for a little bit and actually enjoy real grass instead of virtual grass, and real kissing instead of virtual kissing. I mean, well, it's just because of the scene that they do it in, they're making out in a chair.
But no, it's like the thought that jumped into my head when you said, let's enjoy real grass instead of virtual grass. Oh, there's ants! Oh!
Virtual ants, bugs in the program.
These ants suck!
I hate these. Let's go back to VR. But, that was one of the themes of the movie, and the other is, accepting people for who they are in the real world, which again, we spent a lot of time talking about that, and I don't know that we came to a full resolution, but at the end of this movie, you get that Wade is accepting Samantha for who she is in the real world, and she's accepting him for who he is in the real world, and they both have their VR personas to go to do something else, to get a little bit of escapism as well. So,
because ultimately the world is still kind of crappy.
Yeah, all they did was keep the Oasis as a place free of, and again, the other theme of this movie is commercial marketing and all that kind of crap. Yeah. But all the IOI folks wanted to do was advertise everything. We can sell 83.7% of their viewing area before they start having seizures. Like, oh, good, yeah, you're going to ruin the Oasis. Good job.
Yeah, greed is bad.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Gordon Gekko said it, and again, in the 80s in Wall Street, greed, for all intents and purposes, is good. It drives us. And greed, when focused in the right direction, is okay, but you have to recognize when it's time to not be greedy.
Yeah, but then that's when I want to see Bane pick him up by the scruff of his neck and goes like, "For you." No, but it's kind of jumping around too. One thing I thought of at that last scene when he goes to the stacks and everyone's crowding around him, they're saying, "We know what you did."
Mm-hmm.
And he just pulls a gun out and everybody backs off and it give him free passage and everything. It just made me think of the Merovingian from The Matrix when they were in the club.
Yeah.
And he goes, "How many bullets do you have in those guns? I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's not enough." I was like, perfect opportunity. But then again, The Matrix was a 90s movie, so maybe not. But
Damn it. Damn those references.
Damn it. But that's, again, that's the first thing I thought of when I saw that.
But they could have included that because there were some current references in there too, like you had mentioned, Overwatch and Halo and that sort of thing. So they could have put it in there.
Yeah, would have made it fun. But, that's the other thing, too. It's like, the one thing I kind of rolled my eyes at, and this is the last thing I'm going to complain about for this movie, is that how quickly that the police just kind of arrested him. This man's a powerful, rich CEO, and it's like they kind of treated him like a regular person and everything. And I don't know, I had a hard time buying that. I don't know if that's just social conditioning of what I see nowadays and other movies and everything, but... it just seemed like they really neatly swept that villain away. It's like, okay, you've been defeated, and here come the cops, and they're going to arrest you. And never mind that, he still has a lot of money and a lot of lawyers at his disposal. And it seemed too neat.
Well, it's a Hollywood ending. I mean...
Yeah, very, very Hollywood ending. I guess I've been conditioned away from that because I don't necessarily like Hollywood endings. I like good endings. I like resolution, but there's a fine line, and that one seemed just a little bit too neat for me. That's my last complaint on this movie. Otherwise, everything else was great.
Okay, fair enough. I think my biggest issue was the trailers that were built on frames and shoved into a spot. I can see where that might be convenient, especially if you've lost a lot of real estate to go put places out horizontally. But it just seems like if you're going to do that, why not just build a physical structure since you've already built a place?
Yeah. Wait, what are you talking about?
The stacks. They put trailers inside basically a storage module. And I don't know if that was just a thing that was built and then the trailers just sort of got there. I don't want to say by magic, but it just sort of ended up that people started putting trailers in there and living there. Or if that was by design, like, hey, this is a place for you to live and this is how we're going to do it. So... when a trailer shows up, a crane rolls in and puts their trailer in and they can go live wherever they want to.
Yeah, I can see where they're going with that. If you've seen the favelas in, South and Central America, where they just build apartments on top of apartments. They're not exactly coded. Like I said before, they look like haphazard Lego sets.
Yeah.
It's like they look like they were kind of going with that. And there is a movement, I should say, if a movement can be used in the architectural world where they're using old shipping containers and stacking them.
Yes.
But those are by design. They actually design them. They actually belong together. They have that look of a stack, but, they belong together. So I think they're kind of going for that mix between the containers and the haphazard construction.
Yeah, I can see that. It just vexed me a little bit, especially when they rolled up with the drones, and that was a nice touch with the drone delivering the pizza, and we just accepted it, as a thing 30 years from now. Mm-hmm. But when the drones showed up and put explosives on the structural points, because I'm sure they just said, yep, this is the right place to blow the whole thing, whatever, yada, yada, yada. There didn't seem to be a whole lot of response to that, aside from, I was supposed to be there, I was in my secret hidey hole, oh, my aunt and her abusive boyfriend are dead. There didn't seem to be a lot of time spent worrying about the collateral damage from IOI's real-world interactions, and basically, not even basically, with their, outright murder of, potentially dozens of citizens.
Yeah, that's why, like I said, I had a problem with the scene where all he does is just brandish a weapon and everyone just seems to back away. It's like, if people were truly really angry at that and knew that was the guy responsible, I don't
think the police would have shown up. Or rather, the police would have shown up, but I don't think the police would have had to...
They wouldn't have had anybody to arrest.
Yeah, they might have been able to find pieces parts, but I'm more inclined to believe that it would have been, a lynching.
Yeah, especially in a world that's supposed to be a little bit more dystopian.
Yeah,
I'd like to think that there was a little less law and order that went with it. But you said this was Steven Spielberg, and it was a Hollywood ending. Didn't want to get too gritty. I get it.
Yeah,
it's cool. I'll let it go.
And Spielberg tends to make two kinds of movies. It's either deeply philosophical and meaningful, Schindler's List.
Saving Private Ryan.
Exactly. Or a lot of fun and a good time. This. And this is in that squarely in that category. Again, there's meaning in there. I think we've discussed that a little bit. I'm sure that we have missed some of the meaning because, one, unless you watched it more than once, we've only watched it once. We did just recently purchase the movie. We've discussed that neither one of us have read the book that this is based off of. And as with most books to movies, I'm sure that there was a lot of changes made or things that were left out that didn't fit neatly into the story that they were telling in 2 hours and 20 minutes. So I am curious about the movie, or rather the book, and that only came out in 2011, so it's only about 7 years old. Yeah. And that's actually pretty impressive. It's nice when you see something turned around that fast into a decently made product as opposed to Twilight, sorry, which we will eventually have to watch. You know that, right?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up there. I'm not sure. It sounds like you said something. Vomit. What now?
Yes. Yes. When the sun goes down and you start to see the dusk and it is twilight, sometimes
breaking up again. I'm sorry, I can't.
Over.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I like a double burger with cheese. No. I must be getting the drive-through coming through. It's like so.
No worries. I don't know. Did you have much more to say about this? Again, I think this is one of those movies that we're going to be talking about for a good long time.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said. I mean, we could have made this show entirely about references. I'm glad we didn't.
We still can.
Yeah, no, mission accomplished, and I got to get to work soon. So.
Okay, so with that being said, where would you put this on your shelf?
This one actually, it's just one of those things where amazingly it'll go on the I don't know did I mention if they had a name, because I can't remember if I named it, but the shelf where movies aren't exactly like top pinnacle. I mean, it's not up there with Blade Runner, but it's down with like all the Marvel movies and the Alien movies and all that. It's like whether it's a special movie that holds a special place in my heart, but not general population. Maybe like 2 steps above it.
Okay, I agree with that assessment. I mean, this movie has an emotional hold on me because its references again are right in my wheelhouse, and being that we are self-admitted nerds, a lot of the references, like the Star Trek stuff and that sort of thing, are like, oh, yeah, all right. That some people might be turned off by, we embrace. So this movie has that emotional impact. It was a good story. The special effects were phenomenal. I mean, it was really, just well beyond, I think, most of the movies that are out today. So
Yeah.
it's definitely in a special place. I don't know that I want to say that it's on the top shelf for me. I think for similar reasons as you, I think I have movies that have a higher place in my heart and in, just as a movie goes. So this is definitely cutting edge of the second shelf, trying to break into the first shelf, and maybe on a second watch I might change my opinion of that and put it a little bit higher. But for now, it is leading edge of the second shelf, and I'm okay with that.
Okay. One other thing though, I did forget to mention, and this is just kind of a personal thing. When he wins the first race, because he gets the clue and says, "Oh yeah, put the pedal to the metal in reverse," and he does that, and it turns out it's like he's under the track and he's just going by and he's not affected by any of the obstacles, and then boom, he ends up at the finish line, gets the first key. That is so reminiscent of gaming when you like struggle so much with a level and why can't I get past it? Or even if you did get past it, it's like, oh, that was just so hard or whatever. And then you find out, well, all you had to do was take this path or get this weapon, and then all of a sudden you do it, and it's so easy, and you're like, wow, I think I liked it better when it was hard, because now this is just seems like I'm cheating,
Yeah.
Great on being able to capture that feeling on that scene,
Yeah, and I will say there was some really good foreshadowing. There were a couple of things that were kind of in-your-face foreshadowing, like when the curator of the museum tossed him the quarter. You're like, oh. Well, that's a quarter, and that's going to come in later.
Yeah.
That's like, all right. And that, for me, again, since you can't grow up in the 80s and not know why one would need a quarter, like, oh, continue the game. Let's go.
Yeah. It's kind of like that thing where I remember when we mentioned about Hugo, if you're adept into the history and if you know about it, that you would appreciate things a lot more. And I think that's a case of that here, because again, even these still have coin operated video games, but I mean, just the magic of a single quarter back in the 80s was something. Nowadays you just put money in a machine and it gives you a computer card that you tap.
Yeah, or you had tokens, or even in some places you can use a credit card. I'm like, what the hell's the fun of that?
Yeah, no, exactly. But
so.
And it's like it lends to the if you have knowledge of something, it just makes you. I mean, again, real quick, I know it seems like we already wrapped this up, but we've got so much to talk about. But one thing that Nina said when we watched this is when he went to the Shining hotel. Mm-hmm. When he sort of found out The Shining was the reference, and they opened the door and it was the lobby to the hotel, and that's all you had was this opening scene of the lobby. It didn't give you much more at that moment, but both of us were like, oh, and it's like, wow, this is Nina's words, where she said, what a powerful film that all you needed was that one image to make you feel the way that we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So... Yeah, okay. I think that's it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's perfectly fine.
And great thanks, to my wife Nina for really, being part of this in so many different ways. So, just wanted to mention that.
Okie dokie then. And so, I guess it's time to figure out what we're going to watch next.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, so for our listeners, I was recently at Best Buy and was able to pick up a couple new movies. I got Logan's Run from the 70s, so that's a good, strong science fiction movie that I forgot to add to the list. So
that is a good movie.
But without further ado, we will push the random magic movie button. And so our next movie is
Conan the Barbarian.
Nice. Sticking with the 80s. I like it.
Well, okay, so interesting question. Since I don't own this movie and you do, which is why we're here, is that the version that we're doing, the 80s version, or are we doing the Jason Momoa remake?
No. The Arnold Schwarzenegger one, that's the one I own. That's the one that's on the list.
All right, so listeners, we are doing the 1980s version of Conan the Barbarian. Strangely, I don't think that was referenced in this movie, was it? In Ready Player One.
No, I don't think so. That's why I said it's like it's too bad that the character wasn't made fun of by being called Thulsa Doom, because she had the right hair for it.
Yeah, and we have already discussed it. So look at you with the foreshadowing.
Nice.
Yeah, and again, listeners, this is completely random. I just made a random number generator. That's all it is. Picks from the list of movies that are on the Excel spreadsheet. All right, so with that, if you would like to express your opinion about Ready Player One, you think we put this movie in the wrong spot on our shelves, you disagree with some of our conclusions, you think we didn't come to any conclusions and we just rambled on for about an hour and a half, feel free to let us know on our Facebook page, at Twitter, or email us at WRIOS2016mr@gmail.com. And with that, Dan, your movie-themed, video game-themed, VR-themed, 80s-themed goodbye is?
What? Do I have to wear a sign saying I'm an 11-year-old? Shoot me first? No, thanks.
Strangely enough, I've played Call of Duty online and gotten my ass kicked by what sounded like an 11-year-old anyway, so yeah, that was totally not shocking.
Oh, yeah. No, that's why I stopped playing, because I got tired of being murdered by 8-year-olds and telling me to go do strange things to my mother. I don't know. But
yeah. All right. Listeners, we will see you in 2 weeks with Conan the Barbarian.